Fallen in the Jungle, examining the shocking collapse of Allied strategy in Malaya. Genre: historical narrative, war analysis. Setting: British Malaya, December 1941, January 1942. December 7, 1941. As bombs rained down on Pearl Harbor, a different storm gathered across the Pacific. In the steamy, thick jungles of British Malaya, where rubber plantations stretched toward the sky and monsoon rains drowned the earth, Imperial Japan launched a lightning invasion. Before the sun rose, Japanese soldiers landed on the beaches of Kota Baru, unleashing one of the most astonishing military collapses in modern history. This is the untold story of how a world empire lost the jewel of Southeast Asia, not through firepower alone, but through blunder, arrogance, and strategic blindness. To understand the collapse, we must first understand the myth. British Malaya was the Crown's golden child, rich in tin, oil, and rubber. It was protected, or so London believed, by geography, racial hierarchy, and empire. Singapore, its fortified southern city, was nicknamed the Gibraltar of the East. With its massive naval base, 15-inch coastal guns, and airfields, it was considered impregnable. But like many imperial dreams, it was based on an illusion. There were few tanks. Air power was limited to outdated Brewster Buffaloes. British troops, many fresh from garrison duty in India, had never fought in jungle terrain. Worse still, the myth of the invincible white soldier blinded high command to the training and resolve of the Japanese army. Senior commanders like Lieutenant General Arthur Percival clung to the idea that Japan, lacking European qualities, would never dare a full invasion of Malaya. They were disastrously wrong. December 8, 1941, 1:30 a.m., just hours after Pearl Harbor. Japanese forces landed at Kota Baru, northern Malaya, facing torrential rain and stubborn resistance from Indian troops. At the same time, two other Japanese forces attacked from Siam, modern Thailand, crossing into northern Malaya by bicycle and foot. Yes, bicycle. It would become a signature of their invasion. Lean, fast-moving troops with jungle training, bypassing roads, striking quickly, then vanishing. While British planners assumed tanks would be useless in the jungle, the Japanese brought light tanks, perfect for narrow roads and plantation trails. British forces had none. Meanwhile, the Royal Navy's greatest eastern assets, HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Repulse, steamed out to challenge Japanese landings without air cover. On December 10th, Japanese torpedo bombers struck. Both warships were sunk in under 2 hours. It was the first time in history capital ships had been destroyed solely by air power at sea. The British Empire had been publicly humiliated, the invincibility of the Royal Navy shattered in the South China Sea. What followed was a cascading disaster. The Japanese 25th Army, under the brilliant General Tomoyuki Yamashita, executed a masterclass in maneuver warfare. They didn't fight fair. They fought smart. They outflanked strongholds. They infiltrated through rubber plantations. They turned British roads into death traps. At Gibraltar, British and Indian defenders were caught unprepared and retreated in chaos, leaving behind vital equipment. As the Japanese advanced, towns fell like dominoes. Alor, Penang, Ipoh, Kuala Lumpur. By January, British and Commonwealth forces were in a desperate retreat down the Malayan Peninsula, pursued relentlessly by Japanese air raids and saboteurs. Morale collapsed, desertions rose, civilians fled south in waves. The myth of empire was bleeding out in the jungle. So what exactly went wrong? Underestimation of the enemy. British planners assumed racial and technological superiority. They dismissed Japanese capabilities in jungle warfare, air power, and speed. Lack of preparedness. Malaya had been fortified with the idea of a naval attack on Singapore, not a land invasion from the north. Roads were few, tanks were absent, and air defenses woefully inadequate. Command paralysis. Lieutenant General Percival was a cautious, indecisive commander. He failed to anticipate Japanese tactics, rarely visited front lines, and issued vague orders that confused subordinates. Rigid strategy. Allied defenses were based around static strongpoints and city protection. The Japanese moved around them, cutting supply lines and forcing retreats without full engagement. Logistical collapse. In tropical terrain, retreat meant abandoning trucks, artillery, and communication. Every fallback left Allied troops more exposed, more fragmented, and more desperate. Chapter 5. Singapore, the Final Betrayal. On February 8, 1942, Japanese forces crossed the Johor Strait and attacked Singapore from the landward side, the one the British considered least vulnerable. They used inflatable boats, sappers, diversions, and psychological warfare. After a week of brutal combat, water supplies cut and civilian casualties mounting, General Percival surrendered Singapore on February 15th. Over 80,000 British, Australian, and Indian troops became prisoners of war. It was the largest capitulation in British military history. Churchill called it the worst disaster and largest capitulation in British history. The shock reverberated from London to Delhi. The myth of Western superiority in Asia had died. Epilogue: The price of arrogance. The fall of Malaya wasn't just a military collapse, it was a collapse of imperial imagination. An old empire built on assumptions of racial hierarchy, slow diplomacy, and naval dominance was outmaneuvered by a modern, fast, and ruthless force. The Japanese, of course, would overreach, committing atrocities and provoking resistance that would eventually turn the tide against them. But in those humid months of late 1941 and early 1942, the British Empire faced a mirror and did not recognize its fading reflection. The jungles of Malaya had whispered a truth that London refused to hear. The world had changed. War is not won by walls nor empire by myths. It is won in the mud, the jungle, and the minds of men who adapt faster than their enemies. Inspired by the fall of British Malaya,